Today we'll be talking about accelerators for medical device development, adopting proven technologies. So what do we mean by that, really? We'll be talking about continuous integration and continuous testing. These are strategies that come from the consumer software development world, but we can adopt more widely within our overall device development. We'll also be talking about what I've coined cloud-native device architectures. These are changes in the way we think about our device architecture that can improve our development times and make our update cycle much more simple. So the first thing we'll be talking about is continuous integration and testing. But before we do that, I'd like you to ask yourselves what it is that we're aiming to achieve through testing of our medical devices. Why do we do it, really? And really, testing on our devices boils down to a few things. So we're confirming that it meets its requirements. So does it perform as we expect it to? Does it function as we expect it to? Does it detect the errors we expect it to? The next thing we're assessing is its reliability. If I repeatedly test my device, does it perform the same every time I use it? What is the level of variation if there is any? Also, if I make a change, how has that change impacted my device? Finally, we're also looking at safety. We're making sure our risk controls have been implemented correctly and that they work as we expect them to. This gives us overall confidence that our device is behaving as we expect it to, and that when we deploy it to our customers, it should be safe. So what is continuous integration and how could that help us in our medical devices? Well, continuous integration comes from consumer software development models. It's the idea of implementing small features and regularly integrating them within the overall product. It's very easy to do in software because it's all source code and everything can be compiled. With each change, as we integrate our change, we test the whole system again, or at least the critical functionality of the system. We're making sure that old features continue to execute as they are intended to, and that new features function as we intend them to. What that gives us overall is confidence. That confidence gets maintained throughout the development cycle and means that we have the confidence to deploy our overall feature set. Consumer technologies are integrated often weekly, sometimes on a 2-weekly cadence. Once the baseline product has been launched, think about your Microsoft Office updates. They happen regularly and they happen often seamlessly. Not always. Sometimes we see errors. But new features are identified, they get developed, they get integrated into a staging environment, as we might call it, somewhere that it's safe to deploy. If everything works as we expect it to, it gets deployed to users. Overall, what this aims to do is reduce development times and make sure that we release at a point that we don't have to have completed all features, but we've got enough features that we are suitable for release. The surprises get worked out along the way, and we continue to build confidence in the design. A key component of continuous integration is the deployment of automated tests. So automated tests are software scripts which test our platform. Sometimes they'll be testing hardware elements, sometimes they're just testing pure software. What this gives us is a very fast, repeatable, and consistent way of testing our device. We're not reliant on training operators. The software will perform exactly the instructions as it's given. This facilitates continuous integration because it means we can deploy a raft of automated testing rigs or systems, which can then test every integration point along the way. So I make a change to the device hardware, I get that tested automatically. I get a list of results of things that passed, things that failed, and areas that need to be changed. By doing it, I can have multiple features developing simultaneously, and I can have the automated tests executed the same across every feature set that's being changed. What this also allows us to do, particularly in the medical field, is to concentrate our manual testing activities either to high-risk functions where we really want to make sure that they're working and we want very skilled operators looking at them with close attention to detail, or things which might be costly to automate, things which or whereby the cost doesn't add overall benefit to the program. What this gives us is test engineers who can focus much more of their attention to the things that they need to focus on. They're not doing day-to-day testing activities anymore, or their day-to-day is much more important and adds much greater value to your testing program. Really, we're getting the most out of our test engineers. So we can execute these automated tests either just using simple lab laptops or computers. If it's a simple serial connection, they can execute. It can be a matter of minutes and all of your tests have been executed. If we need more detailed control of the hardware, we can use something like a Raspberry Pi. These are freely available and we can execute tests on them. Sometimes we have standalone software tests, something akin to unit tests. If we have software as a medical device, that's a very simple way of testing our device. Or we can employ a combination of the above. You don't have to employ a single testing strategy across your whole program. It would be inadvisable to do so. And it's key to point out that automated testing is not just for software testing, it's for testing the overall system. I can use it, as I say, if I make a small change to the hardware within my platform, I can run all of the automated tests that check that the new hardware performs as I expect it to, that I've not introduced unexpected changes. I can also simulate, let's say I'm working on a diagnostic device, I can simulate my assay behavior. That means that I can prove that I can measure it correctly, that I can analyze it correctly, and I can interpret it correctly. By employing automation in areas which add key value, overall, we're improving the outcomes of our tests or improving the usefulness of our testing. So how can we use this in, say, a complicated system? We might have a team of hardware engineers, a team of software engineers, a team of mechanical engineers. Well, if we look at each of our teams, say X and Y, each of them is developing some feature and the tests which support it. Once their feature is ready to be integrated, now let's say it's a change of PCB. They have their PCB, they make a change to it, they test everything using the new PCB, and it is integrated into an updated version of our device. If all the tests failed, because the work has been done independently of the main device, we can still go back to our original version if we need to make further changes. If we have another team that's working on a different set of features, we have exactly the same routine. We integrate and we get another different version. We have incremental changes in project status. And what that means is that if, say, we find later that there's a problem with our version 1.2, as it's labeled here, we can go back to version 1.1 quite easily. We have very fine configuration control, and we know that the device was performing as we expected it to here. That's the beauty of integrating regularly. So what things do we need to bear in mind when we are performing continuous integration? Well, as we've already discussed, the features need to be small enough that they can be integrated and that you can independently assess each one of them. So if we're making a PCB change in our hardware world, it needs to be a single PCB as far as possible. The change needs to be small enough that if something has gone wrong with it, we can identify what has gone wrong without introducing lots and lots of change. If we have mechanical parts that are changing, we introduce a single new mechanical part as far as possible, or as few parts as we need to change to support this new integration. Software functions are sometimes the easiest to integrate because we add a new feature. The new software feature is just integrated and the rest of the hardware platform doesn't really change very much. As I've already said, these need to be independent changes. I can't be changing 3 functions and features all at once. because I can't identify whether it's function A that's broken, function B that's broken, or function C that's broken. Or it could be all of them, or any combination of them. By doing things independently, we get a much clearer idea of what is and isn't working, and we've got smaller steps backwards if we need to reverse a change. We also need to be careful that features don't become stale, and what I mean by that is we can't have teams that work on a feature based on, say, a version 1 of our platform, and that doesn't get integrated until much, much later, by which point they have to do a lot of work to bring their feature up to date with the existing platform. In the software world, we might call this rebasing. It often can lead to problems further down the line if you don't see, or if mistakes are made during that spin backup. If we leave features to become stale, well, like a piece of bread, they become stale and no one wants to use them anymore. Try and make sure that your features are integrated as they are developed, and they are integrated regularly. From a regulatory point of view, once we start implementing automated testing, we need to make sure it's validated for its specific purpose. This is part of our quality management system. If we have a high-risk device, we need to make sure that we are very confident in the results that come out of the validation framework. The reason for this is that we're potentially using this to submit evidence to regulatory authorities. If we don't use it as part of our verification overall, then maybe the validation is much smaller. We're just using it to gain confidence throughout. If we're using it to automate verification, we have more validation evidence that we need to show. The automation framework also needs to be flexible. If I'm changing the device that I'm testing quite a lot, and the automation testing system can't adapt to those changes, then I'm changing the automation framework a lot, and I have to keep validating it, and we don't save time overall. As with anything under medical device development, our automated tests need to be under configuration control and need to be managed as though they are as critical as the device we're working on. It's testing our medical device, and if we don't have confidence in the things we're testing and the things that we're using to do the testing, we can't gain confidence in our system. Finally, it needs to have documentation that's suitable for the level of submission that we're performing. Different regulators ask for different things, but they're mostly related. Finally, as a point of consideration, continuous deployment, which is the next step beyond continuous integration, that's unlikely to happen in a medical setting. We have to go through regulators. Our deployment can't happen as soon as a feature is integrated, unlike in, say, consumer software world. What we can do is plan for a deployment cadence. Say every 6 months, we will have completed a number of features, we'll have verified them along the way. We can now deploy an update to our device every 6 months. If we plan for it and we make sure that our processes are designed around this deployment, we can reduce the deployment time of our devices. Obviously 6 months is probably quite ambitious for most devices. So the next topic is what I've coined cloud native device architectures. And what we mean by this is thinking about how we can use the cloud to modify our device architecture in such a way that it helps us to either deploy our device faster or more reliably, a combination of all of the above, just ways that we can adopt the cloud and improve our devices overall. So if we consider the way smartphone apps work, you might be surprised to know that most smartphone apps don't do data manipulation on the device directly. The data processing is performed online, mostly in the cloud or in whatever web servers the developer is using. As we have high networking speeds these days, this doesn't really lead to much latency for our users, for us. What it means is that processing algorithms are hosted on known hardware in known environments with known data sets and can be more tightly controlled. What it also means is that they have even more processing power. Smartphones are very powerful processors, but the cloud can integrate much more processing power even than the best smartphones on the market can. So can we adopt something similar in our medical device development? The question should really arise if we're doing data manipulation on our device and we're doing analysis on the device. Can we do something off-board, online, for example? I'd like you to consider 4 different architectures through here. We have a single physical device with all the software needed to collect and analyze data on board. I should state that these are IVD-like devices. This is an area I'm more familiar with. Our second architecture is a physical device with 2 separate processors, one which does data collection, one which does data analysis. The third is a physical device which uses cloud-hosted processors to perform the data analysis. And the fourth is sort of a hybrid between options 2 and 3, where all of the data is processed on our single device, but the configuration for our data analysis comes from a cloud system. While we're thinking about these, we're going to look at how it affects verification and validation and how it affects the deployment of software changes to our device. There will be differences between them. And before we go on, it should be easy to consider that different architectures suit different applications based on their specific needs. There is no one size fits all, just a consideration to be made about, does the architecture we have really address our problems? So in our case, we have we're considering that there will be frequent updates or semi-frequent updates, as frequently as we can manage, to improve our device performance, and that's what makes us a market leader. So we as developers want the solution in this case that gives us the fastest overall time frame. So let's consider the first option. We have a single processor which has all of our software on it. So it's relatively easy to distribute that software. We have one source file that needs updating on one processor. That's very easy to manage in our system. But if we make a change to our processing algorithm, we also have to re-verify everything about the data collection. We can't say that they're separate. They run on the same processor. They use the same memory domain. We may not be able to separate them fully. We need to test our whole platform. We also, if we're deploying updates frequently, we'll be frequently updating the software for the whole thing. That might mean passing out USB sticks. It might mean networking. However we are deploying our software, we're doing it frequently. We may end up with devices that are out of date quite quickly as well. What we have is potentially many different devices with many different configurations. Now, for developers, this could prove disadvantageous when they're helping customers to diagnose faults. In our second case, we have 2 processors, so deploying our software becomes slightly more challenging. We have 2 processors to manage. It's not too difficult, but it's extra work to do it. We now have to make sure that our software update process manages both processes well. But we can separate our 2 software items. We can verify the data collection when it is changed, and we can verify the data analysis when it is changed. So long as the interface between the 2 remains unchanged, they should work together. And you can verify that that works. So if we're only changing one element, we reduce our verification time slightly. We also separate risk. We can use the 2 processes to manage the risk between the 2 of them. However, we still have the problem that frequent updates to, say, the data analysis platform result in frequent software pushes to our analysis. We still end up with different devices potentially having different configurations. And as we've already said, we now have multiple processes to manage. It's slightly more complicated, not massively. In our third case, we have a cloud system, could be a hosted server, that is responsible for doing data analysis. Our physical device simply becomes a data collector and possibly a presentation layer for the user. So the advantages in our use case are that we've separated our two pieces of software. The data analysis can be verified independently of data collection. Data collection can be verified independently of data analysis. We can verify that our physical device works as we expect it to, and when we make changes to our data analysis, we can verify that works as we expect it to. If I add a new verification method, I can add that in a separate memory domain, even within the cloud, which means I don't need to re-verify, potentially, depending on your strategy, means I may not need to re-verify all of the data analysis methods. Maybe I just need to verify the new one. So we have potentially a reduced number of updates to our physical devices and therefore fewer variants in the field, and a more tightly managed option in the cloud that we can deploy more frequent updates to. What this does mean is that we have to rethink how we do our technical file submissions. We have to make sure that it's suitable, that if we're making changes to the cloud, that it doesn't impact risks to our overall device. Major cons to this are that we're reliant on network transfer for the analysis to occur. If we don't have a network connection, we can't do our analysis. We also have cybersecurity considerations, which are much stronger. We are actively passing data through a remote connection. We have to make sure that no one can gain access to that data or manipulate it. And all of this means that for some applications, it may not really be a suitable architecture, but it's one that could be considered. The final, more hybrid option really is looking at distributing the configuration of our analysis such that the software on board our device changes less frequently, but can be told about new analysis methods more frequently. Now, the benefits are that, again, we potentially reduce our number of software updates, and we are able to asynchronously receive new configurations. We potentially have to do less verification on the device because we're changing it less frequently, and our validation is about the new configuration and demonstrating that that configuration works as we expect it to. The difficulties, of course, are that, well, again, we need a network connection to receive that new configuration. We may end up with devices in the field with different configurations, although we were happy with the configuration at each point in time. We're also potentially increasing the initial verification activity. We have to demonstrate it has a greater level of performance and is more flexible to change. One of our requirements, therefore, is precisely specifying the input ranges that these parameter files can take, which we should be doing anyway. But if we're making it very flexible, we have a greater number of changes cascading through the device that we need to be aware of and we need to have thought about for verification. That initial verification might be much more challenging. Before we move on, something to really consider with any of these architectures is there is no one-size-fits-all solution. Different architectures suit different applications better. If you have a safety critical device that has to work all the time, offloading data to the cloud may not be suitable. If that data connection is lost, you have lost your analysis and it can't be used in a safety critical situation anymore. Similarly, you may find if you're constantly releasing new configuration files because the types of assays that you're able to release is happening very frequently, regularly updating the software on your device may be unsuitable. We also have to make sure that our regulatory strategy and our technical file is structured such that it works around the architecture that we're adopting. These are things that we are considering anyway during our development, but become critical when we're considering different ways of deploying our functionality across the device. One final thing to consider with having networking connectivity and cloud platforms is whether we can improve the way we monitor our devices in the field. It's already a requirement in the EU and the USA for post-market surveillance of devices, and we have to do that in an active way. So why don't we automate as much of that as we can feasibly? Can we collect data about our devices continuously or semi-continuously such that we are able to identify early the likelihood of abnormal device behavior? We can already use AI to detect security threats. Can we train an AI system to detect faults in our device? Can we retrain it to detect security events in our particular device? Can we use it to detect incorrect use by operators? Does an operator need retraining? Does a patient need retraining? Now, most of this functionality might be outside of the medical device scope, doesn't fit within our medical device submission, but helps us to learn more about our devices, helps us to maintain them better in the field. What cloud solutions in particular offer in this domain is the ability to iterate through the post-market through this surveillance activity more frequently. Learn, iterate, modify. It will also allow us to store much more data about our devices, and in some cases it increases the rate at which we can deploy our development features. However, the challenge for organizations is to build the custom applications that help them to do this. Most cloud vendors don't provide off-the-shelf solutions that are suitable for medical devices. They may be suitable for consumer devices, and we may be able to adapt and modify them, but we may have to create custom processing and monitoring capabilities in-house, which will be very powerful, but takes time and takes cost to develop. So it's something to consider. Again, if we are doing this, we have to consider cybersecurity. As soon as we add external connections to our devices, cybersecurity becomes a big consideration, particularly in the modern world where cybersecurity events happen all the time. We have to assume that eventually we will be a victim of a cybersecurity event. So what we have to do is to mitigate them, prevent them from happening in the first place, and plan for an incident when it does occur. All of this is very similar to risk management generally, but applies to cybersecurity. There are good standards that we can follow that help us to do this. If we follow the ISO 27000 standard, that will help us to develop all of our processes and documentation to help us do things in a structured way. Likewise, AME TR57 helps us in the same area. Regulatory wise, we may be managing personal data. As much as possible, we should avoid managing personal data in the cloud, but sometimes for our application it's necessary. We need to make sure that we're following the regional regulations, and particularly with things like GDPR, we may need to instantiate our cloud instances in that particular region to avoid issues of data transfer. Finally, safety. Safety is the key thing with all medical device development. We need to make sure that what we implement in the cloud is suitable for use and is safe for use. We may have to use specialist providers to do this if we're doing high-risk development activities, or we may be able to implement more moderate risks within the cloud and take advantage of it. As we've said several times, so long as we are using an architecture that's appropriate for our intended use and for our device overall, we can build confidence that we're doing the right thing, and we can develop and document it as we would expect to. Thank you very much for your time.
Are there any recommendations for software updates for the FDA?
So the FDA is always interested in your technical file submission and your clinical evidence. So your development path, your development strategy is to, or part of it is to make sure that you're keeping your design documentation and your design history information up to date throughout your process. This is something that continuous integration can help with. if one of your checks at each integration point is that you have all of your documentation and that all of your tests are passing, as you are developing, you have the confidence that your technical file is being built correctly. So as you get to each resubmission with the FDA, you know you have the information available, you can submit it with good confidence.
Excellent, thanks for that. So another question is, how can suppliers add value to the process and helping to accelerate the development cycle?
So we have a lot of specialist suppliers within the medical sector who part of their whole role has been developing tools and systems for medical devices or for use within medical devices. What I would like to see more broadly is organizations supplying their design information in a format that can be used as part of safety critical submissions. For example, if you're submitting to the US FDA, it used to be a requirement, I'm fairly sure it still is, what they call the special documentation of soup items and of your relevant components of your software system. I would like to see more suppliers being willing to be part of this. They don't need to accept the liability necessarily, you as the medical device manufacturer will, but just supporting more organizations to adopt those technologies and overall help us improve the cadence of feature delivery.
Excellent, thank you. We have time for one more question. So it was a nice simple one. What is the best way to speed up development?
So there's no one answer. The fastest way of developing something for one organization may not be the same for another. It depends on your individuals, your processes, and the type of device you're making. I definitely recommend continuous integration as a strategy, but you need to find a way of working that out within your particular organization. There's no, as we've said before, there's no one size fits all strategy that works for everyone. Try things. If the process isn't working, change the process. Be flexible and be agile in the way we're working. And that should overall improve our time.
Excellent, thanks, Tom. We have actually just had one more question come through. Could you let us know what your opinion is on using Google Cloud for medical devices?
So I would have to say it depends on the risk profile of the device and what it is and the level of risk of what we're hosting in any cloud environment is. So I'm more familiar with AWS rather than with Google Cloud, but it's very similar. I wouldn't necessarily host highly critical infrastructure in a non-medical specific cloud at the moment, but equally, it is feasible with appropriate risk management. It really depends on your specific application. It's something we would be happy to talk to people about if they have any support needs for hosting in any particular cloud, but it's difficult to say whether it's a no-go or it's possible. It all depends very much on device risk and what the risk profile of what you're implementing in the cloud is.